In the name of our loving and ever-present God. Amen. There you are. The Gospels are not particularly kind to those persons who would be defined in those days as rich. There you are. One of the things about having been a professional singer for 30-some years, 5 or so years, is that I have had the opportunity, because the world of opera is a world that requires a lot of support from persons who would be at the center of what we might call wealth. And during the course of my career, I have met, some of you will recall my saying, I actually have met Queen Elizabeth. She walked about that far away and she said, "Thank you very much." And I said, "You're welcome, Your Majesty." No further contact as far as I can tell. Prince Philip came by after she passed, and he stood and talked with us for a while, and I remember how gracious he is. And I was also surprised that he's not nearly as tall as we think. He's not 6'4". He's about my height. That just shows how tall I would look if I were slim. And always photographed sitting on a horse from below. With a tall cap. I've also met the son, and actually worked with the son of J. Paul Getty. Does anybody remember that name? Back in the 50s, he was considered the world's richest man. But those were the days when you had to work for a living by starting an oil company, instead of being clever and starting a computer company. I worked with Gordon Getty on his opera called The Plump Jack. During the course of my music career, I had the opportunity to work with Luciano Pavarotti and with Domingo, Placido Domingo, and lots of names. I rehearsed with Domingo one day, and there's a story about that I want to tell you. I'm setting this stage not because I want to be name dropping. If you want to play that later, we can sit in there and we can all name drop. Because I know you all have met in your life, you've met people who are significant and who have significant, oh, isn't that interesting how that just kind of falls out, that expression, significant. Significant. Well, what's that got to do with this, Jimbo? What's that got to do with Lazarus and the rich man? Well, first of all, let's be really clear. Let's be really clear. I mentioned it last time when I would neatly, I thought, until I got caught after church, but I thought I had neatly sidestepped that you can't serve God and mammon thing. I thought I had skipped right over that, but I got nailed. You can't serve God and wealth was that line that was at the end of last Sunday's gospel. And here we have it again. It's riches, wealth. And I want to go back to say that when this was written, we were not arguing over capitalism or socialism. Those didn't come about until human beings got smart enough to use bigger words. We didn't have the wealth of nations. We didn't have that kind of discussion. Who were the wealthy when Luke was writing? Who were they? Anybody? We've had Bible study here enough to know. Who were they? Who were the wealthy when Luke was writing?
Landowners.
Landowners. And?
Money changers.
Money changers. They would have been a part of the structure that we're talking about, and I want to get to later on. Who were they?
Tax collectors.
Tax collectors, money lenders. They were also the nobility. They were the very small group of people who had what? Power. And the power wasn't in the wonder-working power of the Lamb that we're talking about. They were the who? They were the emperor. They were the generals. They were the senators. They were the people who were the leaders of the well, not the Maccabees necessarily, but the people who followed after Alexander the Great and ruled that part of the world. They were the power. And rich and power were exactly the same. Now we run into that today, don't we? Let's be really clear about this. Let's be really clear about this. If you've got sufficient funds, you will have a good lawyer if you need one. If you don't have sufficient funds, you will also have a lawyer if you need one. Notice the difference. That's the reality. I'm not advocating for one side of the line or the other. I'm not saying this is good, this is bad, or this isn't different. I'm not saying that. But there's something really interesting. There's something really interesting about how riches and power are associated together. And I went to the Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip on purpose because in the UK, that bastion of conservative thought, the people who are associated with royalty are often the people who would never in their lives look at Lazarus when they walk by him. Doesn't matter. See, this is where we run into trouble. This is where we run into trouble. Because what is the accusation against this rich person? What is the accusation? He's rich. No, that's not the accusation. What is the accusation?
Doesn't show love.
He doesn't show love. Back and forth. He's wearing purple. First of all, purple was an exclusive color. So he was a part of the top of the line. And he also fed sumptuously every day. Fed sumptuously. And that was in the day when oftentimes people would use bread to clear their plates, and then they wouldn't eat that. They would just throw that under the table. So people, dogs, would come and get that. That was an interesting, different time, wasn't it? But what was the accusation? He did not show love. I want to take that one step further, if I may. It's not that he didn't show love. He didn't even acknowledge the existence of the person. He didn't even acknowledge that Lazarus was there until when? Until when? Until Lazarus is dead, and he is dead, and he's over here working off his sins in purgatory. He's working his sins off, and he's looking across, and there's Lazarus. This whole story, you see, is about how people understood that world and this world in those days. The Pharisees taught that there was an afterlife. And one of the reasons that there was an afterlife is for justice to be brought about in the world. For justice to come into the world. This is what people were praying for. That what the poor person like Lazarus would encounter after he died, that would actually become a reality while everybody's alive. That's a gross oversimplification, but you get what I'm talking about. The Messiah was going to bring that loving embrace.
Could I ask?
Sure.
Just to keep simplifying. It seems to me, as we're saying about the rich, those who have had much put in, who have gained much, are really expected to have output, to recognize their humanity, to practice their love.
That's an interesting point. When a person was given the role of leader or given the wealth, people, remember how this works? If somebody's really poor, Lazarus' parents must have been really great sinners, or Lazarus must have been a huge sinner, or else he wouldn't have been in such a state. So the rich person was a righteous person by nature of how that must be so, because he is blessed. He cannot be blessed if he is not a righteous person. So a person in power, a person in leadership, was given that role by the power and presence of God in the world. And therefore, because of that relationship in the world, that person is supposed to love humankind. So the answer to your question is, long way around, is yes. A long way around is yes. But Lazarus is laying there. Now he's in heaven. And here's the rich guy over here. We don't know the rich man's name. We don't know the rich man's name. We know Lazarus' name. Not only here, folks, remember this. Not only did he not acknowledge Lazarus laying there on the ground. Not only did he not acknowledge Lazarus laying there on the ground, when they got together and the play was being acted out in this story, it's a wonderful 3-act play. This is a wonderful story where the rich man's looking over there, and what does he say? Abraham, send Lazarus over here to give me some water. Send Lazarus over here to give me some water. Oh, well, send him out to tell my brothers. He is still not acknowledging the value and credibility or the realistic or the reality of this person, Lazarus. He's still not getting the message, brothers and sisters. He's still not getting the message. Okay, I'm going to go back into my own world. Here in San Francisco, there's a wonderful thoroughfare. It's Highway 1, goes through San Francisco, right through the center of San Francisco. There's a place where it comes up Van Ness Avenue. It turns to the left, goes over 1 block. It turns to the right and goes up, I believe it's Franklin Street. I can't remember. But there on the corner is the rehearsal studio for the opera. It's actually part of the San Francisco Symphony building, but there it is. This is one of the busiest roads on earth. You try to imagine some of those pictures you see of Paris and Japan and some of the, and Rome, some of those places. This is one of those roads. It's a place where even if the light is green, you look both ways about 9 times before you put your foot down to go across the street. It's that busy. And here is Pavarotti's coming today for a rehearsal. Pavarotti is coming for a rehearsal. I have never seen any of these people up front and personal. So oddly enough, I found myself standing by the door. For some reason, I don't know what I was out there for. I was folding paper. I don't remember. I needed to be by the door when he arrived. He came up in a Cadillac, pulled up beside the road. There are 3 lanes on this road. There's a parking space right next to the building. Then there's this first narrow lane. Cars are meant to turn 3 lanes. Fun place. Pulls up in this car, gets out of the car, leaving it in one of these lanes. And these were the days when, you've all seen them, when some large cars had doors which actually opened out and they would go into the next lane. He stopped the car, got out of the car, left the door open, went into the building, and somebody had to go and move that car. In the meantime, the busiest street on the planet is being backed up by this person. There's another story. I was called on Tuesday night because I was covering the role of the major. I was covering the role of the major in an opera. I was called on Tuesday night. I'd given the music on Tuesday afternoon. I was called on Tuesday night. Jim, you need to be at rehearsal at 9 o'clock to work this through with an accompanist, because you're going to have to be at rehearsal at 10 o'clock with Placido Domingo, Shirley Barrett, Ruthann Swenson, Justino Diaz, Michael Devlin, and with the man directing the show is the He is the head of San Francisco Opera, is directing the show. He has $1 million cast. I've told this story before. $1 million cast and me. So I show up and I have my music. I had rehearsed it for an hour. I was book bound, we call it, where I needed to be looking at my music. So whenever I looked up and saw the conductor, I would sing, but I'd have my book up there. And Jim, you need to move left. I'd move and I'd have to do this with my book. And it was getting to be very frustrating. It was $1 million cast and me. And the director was really getting very short. We have a tea break. Thank goodness we have a tea break. I will say, actually, thank God we had that tea break. During the tea break, Placido Domingo comes over to me and he says, Jim, he knew my name. Jim, we're going to be rehearsing together. You and I will be rehearsing together after the break. He said, come here and let me show you something. On the center of the stage of the Opera House in San Francisco is the big table with maps on it. And he said, I will stand here. You're the audience. I will stand here with my back to the audience. He didn't say back to the audience. I happen to notice that because I understand theater. And he said, you put your book down here. And he said, that way we can work together. And he said, you will be able to see your music. And he said, and don't worry about him. The difference between the two behaviors is in Scripture today. Two of the greatest singers on the planet. One didn't see anybody, and the other one knew my name. We're not talking about money. It is there. It is implicit. But what we are is talking about how we treat each other. How we look at each other. How we find in each other the power and presence of a living and loving God. And there you are.